Right, good morning everyone, and thank you very much for that introduction, Chairman. I will start by saying I have a large number of slides. Some of them are quite busy, there's a lot of information, there's so much I want to tell you. I'm actually bringing back the innovation right back into the domain of agriculture, food security, and what we're doing about it in the UK. So I'm very keen to move swiftly through some of the detailed slides, but I'm very happy for everyone to have a copy of the presentation because there are links into further presentations. So moving swiftly on, first of all to say to Teagasc, thank you so much for inviting me and congratulations on the launch of such an excellent Foresight report. There's two words that stuck in my mind when I saw the very first draft of that and when I read it, and that was exponential innovation. Following on from Banning and his reference to exponential technology, it seems to me that exponential is one of the trade words of today, one of the code words. Just to be absolutely clear, I'm not going to go into my detail. The chairman introduced me quite adequately. UK Trade and Invest is a UK government department. I'm actually not a civil servant. I'm a specialist advisor to UK Trade and Invest and have been wearing various hats related to food and health for almost 9 years now. But really, the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning and keeps me working long past retirement age is really about innovation and turning that innovation into real commercial success. Whether that in today's context is success for farmers or whether that success is for the many businesses that make up the agri-food supply chain. So I'm really, really keen to, as I say, lead to commercial success. And UKTI is the business arm of government. So we work around the world with overseas companies, helping them to invest in the UK, and we also help businesses that are based in the UK, whether or not they're UK owned, to trade their goods and services around the world. So what does the future hold for agriculture? I'm having a bit of a brainstorm as well as telling you what we're doing. And we've heard so much, and I couldn't possibly repeat the expertise and the eminence that Banning has, but so many new technologies that all go into agriculture and agricultural technologies. One of the things I'm really interested in is graphene and some of the potential that some of the real novel materials, high-value materials, can play a really important part in agritech. But we'll say more about that later. One thing I'm very keen on, and this may sound strange from someone that at one point in her life was a sort of career academic, and that is there's so much innovation coming out of the research base. Just so much. I'm really keen that we're led by the pull of need. I call it industry pull, whether it's social pull or whether it's industry pull. We must be aware that many of the technologies that we're talking about in modern agriculture are going to be disruptive. And in terms of agri-tech, we're not working in the sort of domain of big pharma or big electronics companies, the Apples and Microsofts of this world, but we're really working from a much smaller cost base. So I think for every new technology that we try to bring to the marketplace, it's really important to do a proper cost benefits analysis. How much is it going to cost and what will the result be? Without that, the uptake just simply will not happen. And every farmer that I've ever met will say, how much do I have to spend? What difference does it make to my bottom line? And if we can't answer that, we can't expect new technologies to be adopted to their maximum value. So I think we need a new approach. And actually the new approach suits me very well because I'm a biochemical engineer. And in the early days of biochemical engineering, no one really understood us because we sort of had one foot in life sciences and one foot in engineering. And we were neither deemed by the academic world to be pure specialists in either. Today, we can only see some of these technologies come to the marketplace if disciplines work together. So I'm just going to say a little bit about the need, and you know many of these data, but the critical need around the world, not just in developing countries, but in America and Europe for food security. And we're talking about a big business. The agri-food supply chain, as you can see there, is worth nearly £100 billion. It employs almost 4 million people in the supply chain, and agriculture alone employs about 500,000. Exports, you can see there last year represented 22 billion, and the UK is one of the top 12 worldwide food and drink exporters. So how can we meet those demands and those growing demands? Well, only via innovation. And some of the key sectors in our industry where there are opportunities are obviously plant breeding, plant nutrition, plant health, animal breeding, animal health, agri-engineering. I do apologise, there's a repeat there. Sensor technologies and water management. So what did we do when we said we want to make a difference to the agricultural economy in the UK? How did a very small team of 13 people manage to sort the wood from the trees and find out where the impact could be? Well, we looked at the strengths that we already have. We looked at the science base, we looked at the supply chain, and we looked at access to global markets to decide where our customers would come from. And government departments came together to produce the UK Agritech Strategy, which was launched some 2.5 years ago. I was actually part of the writing team, and in that strategy I wrote 3 actions. And there was about 20 actions, but I wrote 3 of them. And that was UK will increase agricultural investment, it will increase trade, and it will increase market share. Having written those, when the strategy was published, ministers then said to me, well, you better deliver that within UKTI, which is how I came to be working in the role I'm in at the moment. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to double our agricultural productivity in Europe over the next 30 years. But that's in the context of shortage of arable land, and energy, water, disruption resulting from climate change, etc. But also we mustn't forget in agritech the importance of regulation and regulatory barriers, because that's why it's so good to see a Foresight report that's dated and looking till 2035. So much these days is 2020 focused. To get a lot of today's innovation through some of the regulatory hurdles is going to take probably the best part of a decade. And we've got to really embrace new technologies. But I put it to you that the clever bit is to make the interface of those technologies simple and usable. And that's why I've said we've got to distill essential information into a simple format. So I was delighted last month to go to Brussels with colleagues from TSSG and Waterford and talk about digital ag and devices. And I'm not going to say a lot because I couldn't possibly emulate, as I say, all the information and the knowledge that Banning has in those areas. But how can we help agriculture actually capitalise on some of the opportunities? Well, I said earlier, it's all about getting people to take up technologies, and that's easier said than done. So if we look at this map here and look at some of the technologies, you can see how it's quite difficult and how it's a sequential process. And I always say very simplistically, in the farming community, and the farming community that I work with, you've got the real bright leaders that will really, really adopt new technology and try it. You've got the majority of farmers that will say, well, if he does it, and if he spent a bit of money and there's some payback, I'm quite interested. But you've also got that section of the agricultural community that say, it's all about provenance, it's all about tradition, it's all about doing things in the same way that's been done for decades. That is a market niche, and that's very important. But we're not going to sell some of our modern innovations to that sector. So it's about knowing the market. And it's about knowing the actual type of project and where the money's coming from. So along the bottom line here, we've got research councils who will actually fund the blue sky. They will fund the research base. And then we've got Innovate UK and co-funders. They will fund feasibility studies, technology development, demonstrations, systems, and do quality checks. But I put it to you that there is still a long way to go between that and commercial exploitation. And this is where investment angels, venture capitalists, etc. come in. And that's one reason why myself and some of my team are going to San Francisco next week to talk to the Agritech venture capital community to really bring the opportunities for investment from agriculture to them. And as we go from left to right on that slide, we move towards market readiness in the different types of projects. So if we look at some of the precision technologies there and how they're being adopted, GPS steering is now being adopted very rapidly in our farms. Soil mapping is also being adopted. Variable rate treatments, fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, is also gaining apace, and yield mapping. It's very, very hard to collect and collate these data, and my guess is that that rise would be even more exponential if we were able to look at what happened in 2015. I simply don't have that data from the Farm Practices Survey at the moment, although it's due virtually any moment now. So if we just look at some of the opportunities for farms from digital agriculture, more than half of our farmers in the UK use some form of precision or agri-tech. And as I say, it might include GPS steering, milking. All farmers will use smartphones, soil analysis, drones, a whole range of technologies that are being adopted on the farms. And many international companies are working in these areas, and we're working with them in UKTI. We also work on aquaculture. So just to pick one out, for instance, Lockheed Martin there. You may think, why are they interested apart from GPS? They actually have a very progressive subsidiary company which is based in the South Pacific, working on aquaculture. And they can actually monitor the state of the seabed under the very densely packed pens of fish using their satellite technology. They can then move the nets away so that that part of the ocean can be regenerated and moving to a new area. So really working towards sustainability. Because the other important thing about adopting innovation is we must always be really careful that we're not destroying the environment. And we've seen so many examples around the world of overuse of fertilizers, for instance, and the consequent damage to runoff and waterways. So we've actually got to take a broad and holistic approach. So as I say, farmers now all have GPS devices in their tractors, but there are still issues, not least of which access to the internet, compatibility issues, and support issues. What happens when it goes wrong? Just before I left from home to go to Newcastle Airport to fly across, I wanted to access my laptop. I have a code on that laptop, which is actually generated by my smartphone. My smartphone froze. The screen froze. I couldn't turn it off. I couldn't turn it on. I could do nothing. And I was completely, I couldn't access my boarding pass or anything. So I got out my own personal trusty iPad and I put Nokia smartphone frozen. And I found on Google about 50 different websites that gave me an instant solution. But if I hadn't had my iPad, where would I be? So there are big issues about uptake of modern data. It's not as simple as the electronics guys or my children, younger people that are much more IT savvy than me. It's not as simple as people would tell us, certainly not for some of us. And bearing in mind in the UK, the average age of a farmer is 57. I guess I'm not the only one that's a bit of a Dumbo when things go wrong. Fine when they're working, but when they go wrong, there's a problem. So we're trying to work across boundaries. We did an event in Milan at the World Expo in October to bring unexpected companies together. And who would believe that the Williams Formula One team have worked with one of our big retailers, Sainsbury's. They've introduced their aerofoil technology across the front of their freezers in the shops. If any of you actually go shopping, you'll know in some supermarkets, as you walk past the freezer, it's very cold. That's completely wasteful of energy. Formula One, they have developed aerofoil technology to keep their racing cars on the ground when they're turning and cornering and doing all the clever things they do. That same technology has been adopted by Sainsbury's. It keeps the cold air inside the freezer, and they've increased the efficiency of their freezers by about 10%. I've mentioned Lockheed Martin. Canica, a Japanese company, one of the very first investments I worked on in Agritech. Really, really simple. They were selling hoses with holes in, basically, for trickle irrigation to parts of sub-Saharan Africa. The hoses were being chewed by rodents. So they came to the UK and we introduced them to the university department, and they said, we want to stop this happening. So we looked at the chemistry of actually combining a rodenticide into the polymer, still being able to extrude it, the rodenticide still being active. As a result, Canica produced this polymer, and now these triple irrigation pipes, nothing but a drip tap and a pipe on the surface, actually are not eaten by rodents. Not really high tech. There's a lot of science that went into the chemistry of the rodenticide and the polymer, but a very good example of thinking laterally about solutions. Robotics is another example. And one of the companies called Spread, they're developing a factory, urban farming basically, to produce lettuce. They'll be able to produce 10 million heads of lettuce per day. The whole factory, from seed sowing to harvest, is completely robotic. It's really fascinating. The main driver, however, wasn't to introduce robotically grown lettuce. It was about, in the area where this factory is, a serious problem of water shortage. And using this robotic system, it was designed to harvest and recycle the water. And they've actually got 98% water recycle, which is pretty amazing when you consider that the product was lettuce. And that technology is transferable, perhaps on a smaller scale anywhere, to the top of buildings in cities, for instance. 1,000-to-1 applications. So we hear a lot about air miles and transport of food because we want to eat everything all year. This would immediately, city farming, cut down on air miles completely. But the capital expenditure was about $17 million. But they still think that the process, based on those sales projections, will be profitable. So another very good example. I'll go very quickly through big data. It's so important. And as we say, data is often considered a burden and a big stick. And there's real issues around personal security and regulation. So we need to join ourselves up. The agricultural community needs to talk much more broadly around the world. And actually, the rate of accumulation of data, IBM say 90% of all the data in the world was created in the last 2 years. But what we do know is that companies that use big data are 5 times more likely to make decisions much faster than their peers. And they're likely to be sector leaders if they're advanced. Well, translate that back down to the farm. We're not going to find many farmers that are experts on big data, but they're users or will be users of some of the outputs. And so we've seen many of the examples there. Changing resolution, for instance, is very, very important with UAVs. And just last week, I was privileged to go to a research group where I saw a new form of microscope, where the resolution was below the size of the wavelength of light, below 20 nanometers. It was an amazing piece of technology. Better resolution, the more you can do with it. And then there's the internet. And again, I'll go very quickly through the growth of the internet and the internet minute. And then space and the space sector. Why is that relevant to Agritech? Well, again, we have one of our investments with our space catapults and a small company called Zero Gravity. They, as we speak, with our British astronaut up in the space station, are doing experiments on plant growth under zero gravity that we were involved in the very early days. So it's a huge potential market and investment in space technologies. Again, I'll go very quickly through this bit because I'm trying to get really to the heart of agriculture. As I say, we work on aquaculture as well as other areas of agriculture, and also plant science. I've mentioned plant science earlier, world-leading growth facilities. You wouldn't imagine that in the UK we have the world collection of cocoa plants, but we do in the University of Reading, and there's a lot of work going on in plant science. I won't go through the detail now, but I'm around all day. In terms of animal health, I'm delighted I've got Simon Doherty here on the front row. Simon is one of my specialist advisors in UKTI who hails from Belfast and is a vet. And Simon is working very closely on animal health. And Simon is also here today. So again, it gives me a good excuse to go very quickly through the animal health slides and say, any questions on animal health, Simon's your man, not me. But obviously, we're very aware of the One Health agenda and how not only the etiology of human disease through the animal link, but the importance of diagnostics. In my own area of vaccine production and development, much of the leading technology that was developed for human health is applicable to animals and vice versa. So it's a really, really important area. And you can see there that if we are going to reach food security targets, we need to increase poultry production by about 300%, cattle production by a minimum of 75%, and goat and the population of sheep and goats in Europe by 60%. So it's really, really growing. Again, we have a large concentration of expertise in terms of the vet schools, the output in publications, a very large market, an important market in pet foods, and we have a lot of reference centres for animal diseases. So we published a strategy. And really, sticking to my title, I was asked to come here to talk about the strategy. When UK government came together to introduce the Agritech strategy, they also put some dedicated money. So we reckon to spend about £480 million on primary research, and there was another 90 million. It shrunk a little bit with austerity, but basically it's still around about 60 million and 10 million for international development to set up 4 world-class centres of agricultural innovation. They are now up and running, one in big data, one in in engineering and precision agriculture, one in plant resilience and one in animal health. We also used 70 million of the Agritech money to create the Catalyst Fund. This is a fund for small companies to bid into and consortia, sometimes including larger companies and researchers, to actually develop proof of concept. And we've actually got 77 projects now, many of which are completed. And I do have a link to a publication where all 77 are discussed and described. So, as I say, this is just reiterating the funding we've got. We're also working with Bill and Melinda Gates and other charitable foundations and other governments around the world. And DEFRA, our other agency that's involved, have just launched their 25-year food and farming plan. So we're very aware that we need to offer routes to commercialisation, allow agriculture to access new technologies and to get access to government. We need to learn to live with risk in the UK. We are very, very risk averse. It's really difficult for a young startup to get funding because of the culture that we have of risk aversity. And we need to look at not only regulation, but perhaps simplifying regulatory routes, perhaps by a more standardisation rather than regulation. But that itself is another topic. So, as I say, the Agritech organisation, we seek to be the centre of excellence and the first port of call for companies looking for investment or trading opportunities across agriculture. So we've established also a leadership council. We're building on the centres, and there's the link there to the Innovate UK Catalyst programmes. What else do we have? Well, we've got other fiscal and other incentives for companies to invest in the UK. We've got a low corporation tax rate, which is falling. It's just fallen actually to 20%. We've got R&D tax credits, and we've got a thing called the patent box, which I haven't got time to go into, but will describe, makes it very, very favourable for investors. And we've got capital can be offset against tax as well. And also very strong IP protection. And myself and my colleagues in the Agritech organisation are very happy to provide support. And we have tax specialists, planning specialists, and a whole range of other people in the UK. So that's just the start. There's a fairly complex link here to see all the knowledge transfer projects. Really what I would say is we must really, really work together to unlock the value from innovation. Use them, improve them, and use them to contribute towards a safe and healthy, sustainable food. I've left my contact details there, so just before I finish, just something for you all to remember. That all the data ever collected in the world could be stored in a piece of DNA the size of a pencil. So just imagine, now we're broadening things up from the worlds of solid-state physics and electronics to the bioeconomy. Just imagine the potential of the bioeconomy in breeding, in diagnostics, in all the other technologies that I've mentioned. So I really do think now that agriculture is becoming a go-to industry. And hopefully we've done enough by publicising the importance of new technologies to attract young people into the industry. Now, I spent most of my career as an academic working with youngsters, and I like youngsters. I'm quite horrified when I hear the average age of a farmer in the UK is 57. I really, really want to emphasise some of these sexy, some of these really exciting technologies and the part that they can play on our farms and in our agricultural supply chains. It really is a vibrant sector. I know I'm talking to the converted here, but that's a message I hope you can all share with me. Thank you.